Welcome everybody and good evening and welcome to our virtual model Seder. This is in fact our living room and it's wonderful to have everybody join us and experience the preparation for Pesach together. Like we did last year, we find ourselves experiencing Pesach in a world which is somewhat different than we're used to. And I want to make a couple of things clear about Seder and Pesach overall and then launch into tonight's model Seder experience. And firstly is that the coronavirus and the pandemic isn't in any way going to cancel our ability to celebrate and to experience the Festival of Freedom. And we do need to employ all the tactics that we have employed this last year, which is to think outside of the matzah box, to think differently and to pivot and to reorient and to do things that might not be the way that we're used to, might not include all the people around our Seder experience that we are used to, might not be able to go. Certainly for us, not being able to lead communal Seder for the second year in a row is something very, very challenging. We really enjoy leading it together with our children every year, but we have to pivot and we have to adapt. But that means we must prepare. And by joining tonight, you're obviously aware of that, but this is by no means the only preparation that you should do. And there are many hours between now and the beginning of Pesach to continue to prepare, to use the plethora of resources that are out there, that we've made available, that are available on the web, and both of us, and as well as our rabbinic colleagues, are available to answer questions, to make suggestions, to guide, to help ensure that everybody can have a memorable and a joyous Pesach experience. The second piece is tonight we'll not review what we did last week at our Passover workshop. That was more about the fundamentals of the themes of Passover and some of the fundamentals around what it means to understand and to experience Passover and slavery and modern day slavery and slavery of the spirit. This is really a practical course to lead, to understand, and to experience the Seder. This is going to help you, whether you're a guest, or whether you are hosting, whether you're alone, or whether you're with people. Once again, if you're just joining, please, we're not going to be using the chat just because of the distance of the camera and the computer. So if you have questions, feel free to interject, to ask at any time. We're also going to hopefully engage everybody with some questions. So feel free to unmute yourselves because I can't unmute you from this distance. So first a question, when is Pesach? When is Passover? Anybody? Do we all know when it begins? When does the Seder begin?
Saturday.
Thank you. It begins this coming Saturday night, which means there are lots of preparations because it follows immediately from Shabbat. We need to keep that in mind. There are materials that we prepared available on the website and by email to help us properly prepare from going straight from Shabbat into the Seder experience. What do we need to have a Seder experience? What are the required elements that we need? So matzah, excellent. We need a cup for the 4 cups of wine. There are 4 different cups. We also need an additional cup for the cup of Elijah. They do not need to be silver and ornamental, but it's nice to have a very decorative and beautiful table. You need a grape derivative, either wine or grape juice, either one of them. You need a Haggadah, and you need a Seder plate. Some people like to have an additional chair with a pillow. We'll talk about why. And we discussed on Thursday night, there are 7 different mitzvot of the evening, and the Seder experience is designed to take us through all of these 7, 2 biblical and 5 rabbinic. Let's look at the Seder plate and sort of understand what's on it and what needs to be on it. The matzah does not live on the Seder plate. On a regular Shabbat, you have 2 different separate chalot. On Passover Eve, you put 3 separate matzahs on the table, covered with a cover. If you don't have a fancy cover, a napkin, linen, cloth, or whatever you're choosing is fine. The 3 matzah have significance, and we're going to go through the steps of what to use them for. You can use machine-made matzah, or you can use shmura matzah. The machine-made matzah is square. The shmura matzah is round. It means it's handmade. It also means that it is particularly more expensive because of the process in which it was manufactured, which was a very thoughtful, watchful eye to ensure it hasn't gone over the time limit that would convert it from matzah to chametz. And machine made is a little bit more automated, and therefore it's a little bit cheaper per box or per pound. The Seder plate, mostly very similar between Ashkenaz and Sephardic customs. There's a plethora of different customs of what people use for some of the items in the middle, which we'll talk about. But you need a shank bone or a bone. If it's not easy to get a shank bone, a chicken bone is fine, but hopefully a shank bone. You need charoset. How you make your charoset, what's in your charoset is up to you. We'll talk about some of the customs in a moment. We use maror, which is bitter herbs. Bitter herbs, either horseradish or romaine lettuce. We use a boiled egg, and we'll talk about what that means. We have karpas, a vegetable that grows on the ground, so it's inclusive of the following the blessing of borei pri ha'adama, and we have chazeret. Correct. There are different formulations of where they fit on the Seder plate. You can get a Seder plate for $2.99 on Amazon, local Judaica store, Judaica Classics, or a plethora of places, or you can buy one pre-made. It doesn't really matter. It has to be complete. How many steps are there in the Seder? 15. There are 15 steps in the Seder. And the order of the Seder is there designed to take us through each of them and to allow us to go through all of them. But we need to start with the first one. The first one is Kiddush. The whole theme of the evening is to imagine as if we are reimagining, re-experiencing the Pesach experience, but also doing so from a perspective of royalty. So a lot of the customs when it comes to preparing elements for ourselves, we ask others to do them for us. Of course, I can prepare my own cup of wine, but it's more reflective of dignitaries and royalty if somebody, aka Rachel, or anyone around would pour the cup for me. So we don't pour our own 4 cups of wine, and we pour for other people. So the first thing we do is make Kiddush. And Kiddush can be found in every Haggadah that you find. There's a plethora of Haggadahs out there. I think outside of the Bible, there are probably more publications, explanations, and insights published on the Haggadah than any other Jewish book. We live in an amazing time where there's so much available for free online, for so many different Jewish educational websites that we can really find all we need online, but it's also nice to have a book. Our custom is to find a new Haggadah every year and to use it as a preparation for the Pesach experience. This Haggadah is by Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb. It's a beautiful Haggadah. I've recommended it to some people this year. It's called The Royal Table, and Rabbi Lamb, unfortunately, was one of the many great rabbis and individuals who we lost in the last 365 days in this last pandemic. So Kiddush is the first step. We raise a cup and we make the blessing of a wine, like we do on Shabbat, like we do on Rosh Hashanah, like we begin any major Jewish festival, we do with Kiddush, and like we do under the chuppah at a wedding, and like we do at a Brit Milah, at a circumcision. Wine has a significant place within Judaism. And here we're sanctifying time. And we're taking this experience on the 15th of Nisan, and we're taking, making the moment, and we're marking it holy by making Kiddush. And this time, we're taking the holiness of Pesach, we're signing the blessing over wine and some special references to Pesach, and that is the first thing that we do with the Seder. There are many different ways that people start the Seder before they make Kiddush. Some people like to throw questions, engage the children, talk about the order of the Seder, talk about how we're going to run the Seder, and if you're hosting or if you're a guest, you might want to set the stage. And if it's new people, if it's family, you might want to say, everybody, I'm going to ask people to read in English or Hebrew, and most of the Haggadah come in both languages. And you want to make sure you know the format of how things are going to work, so there are no surprises, and nobody's caught with being told to do something, not exactly sure what they're going to do. And we connect to the very first mitzvah given to the Jewish nation, which was performed just 15 days after they left from Exodus. And that's the sanctification of time. And only a free person has control over the precious commodity of time. Time is now yours. and we're told to use it wisely and use it productively. And that's exactly why we begin the Seder with Kiddush. Kiddush has to be recited on a grape derivative, either grape juice or red wine or white wine. It's preferable to have red wine. Any time that we use wine for ceremonial religious purposes, red is preferable. And because because there are 4 cups and we need to consume majority of the cup has a certain halachic measurement to it, but let's use a cup of significance. And we need to drink at least 3/4 of the cup, which can be challenging. So some people like a hybrid of grape juice and wine in 1 cup. Some people like to go 2 cups of grape juice, 2 cups of wine. You need to do what's comfortable for you and recognize the first step of drinking the cup of wine. When we drink, we lean. Which direction do we lean? Anybody?
To the left.
To the left. Excellent. And we do that. Why? There's a pillow here. Actually, it says matzah on it. I don't know if you can see the reflection, but why are we leaning?
Is it because you're relaxing because you're a free man?
Excellent. We're, again, symbolizing the idea of royalty, sitting back, relaxing. We actually have our Passover Seder on the couch, and we make Kiddush at the table. And once we get through the first elements of which we'll get to in a moment of the Seder, once we get to the crux, which is the Magid section, where we go to the narrative, we move onto the floor and we set up blankets and beanbags, and we even get into more comfortable clothes. I take my tie off, and we relax because we're engaging in retelling the story. It doesn't have to happen at the table. Some people don't like that idea. They want to stay at the table and they've worked hard to decorate and set the table. That's fine, whatever it's comfortable for you. This Pesach, because it's falling on Saturday night, at the end of Kiddush, we have to add the special 2 blessings for the Havdalah. And we add the blessing of Borei Ma'orei Ha'esh, which we say every Saturday night at the conclusion of Havdalah. We don't light a new flame. And then we say the blessing of Hamavdu Ben Kodesh Lechol. Ben Kodesh Lekodesh. And then we conclude with the blessing of Shehechianu, both on first night and on second night. There are many different ideas as to what the 4 cups represent, and many different elements of Torah and beautiful commentary on the meaning of the 4 cups, representing the 4 different levels of slavery and 4 different levels of redemption and the 4 matriarchs. And we're not going to spend time going into all of the different experiences, but think about researching for yourselves why there are 4 cups and using that as a prompt for yourself at the Seder, for your guests, or if you're alone, to think about what it means, the number 4 and why there are 4. And think about what's in this cup or in this bowl of wine. It's a grape, or it came from a grape. And think about the significance between the journey of the number of grapes or the individual grape that went to make the wine and the journey of the Pesach story and maybe the Jewish people, and see the similarities in that experience. There are 4 different tenses that we're going to cover in the 15 steps of the Seder. There's the setup, there's the past, there's the present, and the future. If you're writing them down, the setup, the past, the present, and the future. Kadesh fits into the setup. It's journeying, it's beginning this experience into the Magid, which is the past, and then we have the present and the future. Any questions? Okay. Second step of the Seder is Orchatz. Orchatz is the step before Karpas. It is significantly and distinctly linked to Karpas. It is the washing of our hands without a blessing. Where does the concept of washing come from? So the Talmud actually speaks about that we're supposed to wash our hands before eating foods dipped in other liquids, and it traces back to the temple time where it required certain handling of food for the priest, and hand washing was instituted very similar to nowadays with Corona, so that people would grow accustomed to maintaining laws of purity, which was particular for certain types of food. Washing before dipped foods is not a custom that we do 363 days of the year. So why do it at the Seder? So one major reason why we do it is to remind us of the time of the temple and to remember that there was an ideal time when the temple was there, when the temple was built, when the temple existed, when we could go and bring sacrifices. And it's also out of respect to the Passover story.
And what's interesting is that the Talmud, throughout the tractate dealing with Passover, the questions that are asked, often the reason and explanation provided is that it is to stimulate thought-provoking discussion and it's to stimulate curiosity and questions. So very often, even the questions that we ask are reflected in Talmudic language, which is, why do we do this? This is so interesting. This is so novel. This is so different. And part of it is to see the idea of curiosity and the importance of asking questions.
And we can perhaps create some questions for ourselves as we go through these 15 steps and think about what are things that are relevant for me, that are reflexive, that I can think about. And as we begin the meal with this symbolic washing, we can think about what are the things that I want to let go of, that I want to wash away from this past year. And certainly as a community, as individuals, I'm sure we're all thinking the same thing, but there are many things that I'm not thinking about for other people. And what are the things I want to symbolically, ritually get rid of and wash away from this past year? And in Egypt, we were told that we were on the 49th level of impurity, 49th level of tumah, and we were totally disconnected from God. And we need to purify ourselves. We need to go through a purification process. And water has a purification element to it. It's the ritual mikvah. So we think about beginning this step of the Seder experience through a symbolic washing, but also a ritual washing as well. And certainly, we know that clean is king. And we know that there's certainly a heightened level of awareness of the importance of hygiene as a result of current events. And cleaning our hands doesn't only demonstrate respect for ourselves, but it also reflects and represents a respect for others as well, because it allows us to sit comfortably around other people. And this is an inclusive experience. And no matter who we're with, this is what we want to think about as we go through this element of Urchatz. For Kiddush, every person has their own cup. Normally on Friday night and other festivals, one person, the leader of the meal or the household, makes Kiddush with everybody else in mind. When it comes to Passover, everybody's experiencing the Kiddush together, so everybody has to have their 4 cups. But when it comes to Urchatz, this is not for everybody. This is for the leader. And Urchatz takes us straight into the 3rd section, which is a section of Karpas. We're at the 15 steps, and now we're just hitting number 3. What is Karpas? Karpas is a blessing that is Borei Pri Ha'adama, something that grows on the ground. And most people use a potato or parsley if you're of Ashkenazi Eastern European descent. Other people sometimes use celery. Depends really where your family origins are from. If you have no specific family origins of yourself, you can choose any vegetable. It's the first thing that you're eating, and the hour is already late because we can't start the Seder until it's nightfall. So pro tip from experience is have something to eat in the afternoon and take a nap. It's going to require mental energy. It's going to require that you have something in your stomach because you're going to get hungry and you don't want to munch down all of that parsley. It's not so satisfying. So make sure you eat beforehand. We're going from lofty ideas of spiritual impurity, which is Urchatz, and we're about to begin telling the story of slavery. So we go to the ground. We go to something that grew from the ground, and something quite literally that we can say, Borei Pri Ha'adama. And Karpas, the vegetable of Karpas, and the theme of Karpas, and the step of Karpas, reminds us of our humble beginnings. And the only reason that we exist is because God loves us and because God chose us, not because of our own greatness. Karpas comes from what language, anybody? The etymology of the word is Greek, and it means appetizer. And it reflects, again, a symbol of royalty that in times of old, before the meal started, and only those that had the element and the ability and the resources to have refrigeration, vegetables didn't hold for too long because they would spoil. So vegetables might have been cooled, The vegetables would begin the meal, and we're doing this as a sign of royalty. And we do so, excuse me, dipping the vegetable in salt water. And our national birth as a people, we know is coupled in what time, what month? What month did we leave Egypt on the calendar? What was happening? It was springtime. And when we think about the season and the changes of the season, life can sometimes seem dormant, even dead, but there's always something brewing and preparing in the background. And if the karpas is the renewal piece, why are we dipping the karpas in salt water? Why are we taking that sprout of renewal and rejuvenation, and why are we putting it into something as bland and harsh and as bitter as salt water? And I think that this teaches a very important lesson as we reach this third step of the Seder, that life's changes always come with opportunities as well as loss, as well as challenge. And we need to be able to embrace everything that comes our way. And the Seder teaches an important dynamic for us, and that's change. And again, we can use this third step as a prompt to think about what's changed for us this past year and what new opportunities have sprouted that we want to take into next year and take with us and work on and experience. And what losses have we experienced? And that's the third step of karpas. The next step is yachatz. Yachatz is taking the middle matzah. There are 3 different matzahs, and we're breaking the middle matzah into half. We put one away and we keep one on the table. What are we doing here? And karpas is again also part of the setup. We're not yet at the major theme. Karpas is part of the setup. We take the middle matzah and we break it. And there are 3 different parts to the yachatz experience. The first is the middle matzah is like our heart. And we're about to discuss the story of slavery. And therefore, when we talk about the slavery, our hearts are broken. And we're in the midst of hard work. And we're in the midst of pain. And if you read the storyline of the slavery, it was harsh. It was difficult. It was painful. And it's difficult sometimes to see the purpose of why the slavery happened. And sometimes we feel like that as well, that we feel a little bit broken, but we know that's not the end of the story. What are we setting aside? The smaller half or the larger half? This is the second step of the yachatz. If there are 3 parts, we're setting aside the larger part of the matzah. And later at night, we're going to search for it, and it's going to remind us of how much positivity and how much goodness is waiting for us. And as the Seder unfolds and we look to the future and we look to next year, we'll soon see that we'll be able to enjoy the fruits of our labor. And God is reminding us to be patient, that the large part is coming.
And what's interesting also, even just the sound of cracking matzah, everybody I'm sure remembers or has distinct memories of that sounds of cracking. It's also a very, from an auditory processing perspective and visual processing, to see something broken. And that's really how we're starting the Seder and how we're starting this whole experiential night of learning and exploration and discovery, is that there was a tipping point, and there was a point where we were the most broken and rock bottom. And from there, it's questions and learning and engagement and experiences and sharing that allows us to evolve from that place of being broken. And what's interesting is that the Seder itself, as much as it is reflective and historic, it's also projective, and it's about the future. And each of our lives can relate to this. And I would even say this year and last year for sure, more than ever, can relate to these notions of isolation and being apart and experiencing not quite slavery, but limitations. And the idea is that the matzah was not just about this piece of history, but it's a piece of the present. And there are times where we have to be the most broken. And if that's the point of origin, that's the tipping point of when we can experience growth and return and restoration. So that breaking that happens at the beginning the rest of the Seder is really about finding the other piece. And we'll talk about later when we do find that other piece. And that last piece, spoiler alert, the Afikomen, which we're going to have much later on, becomes almost that full circle of restoring ourselves. And that happens at the end after we've completed this experience of the Seder.
And the matzah has a dual symbolism. Matzah is, on one hand, poor man's bread. It's just basic flour and water. It's what poor man eats, someone that has nothing else to eat. And therefore, the matzah, in reflection of being poor man's bread, we put some away for later because you never know where the next meal is coming from. And we recreate that idea and we understand our own brokenness and the brokenness of our ancestors. But immediately we're going to go to the first step of Magid, which is inviting other people to enjoy the meal with us. And a beautiful fundamental teaching and idea is that notion of immediately inviting others to join with you in the midst of my challenge, in the midst of the fact that I don't know where my next meal is coming from. I'm always able to see beyond myself and my own needs and still share with other people. And the question we can ask ourselves to point for ponder is, have I been available to my friends and my family, even throughout my own challenges? And this has been a rough 365 days for all of us in many ways. And have I been there for people that need me, even throughout my own challenge? And the duality of the matzah, as I mentioned, there's the poor man's bread, also the symbol of freedom, because the matzah was baked as we left Egypt, leaving the slavery. And therefore matzah has this beautiful dual meaning. The third piece of yachatz, we said we break the middle matzah, we set some aside for the afikoman, and we return the smaller half in between the two matzot on our table. Our broken heart, our broken self doesn't stand alone. It returns in its place and in the confusing, crazy world that we live in, but it's surrounded by two whole matzahs, by the matzah on the top and the matzah on the bottom. And that's representative of God's presence above us and below us. And that God is always encouraging us, always with us, just helping us stay strong. And the great Hasidic rabbi, the Kotzker Rebbe, known for his beautiful quips and deep teachings, once said there's nothing more whole than a broken heart. It's a beautiful idea. We move on from Yachatz to the longest section of text in the Seder. Somebody corrected me last year when I said the Magid is the longest section, and they said, what about the meal? The meal can go on for as long as you want, and the meal is not just there because we're hungry. The meal is actually part of the 15 steps of the Seder, but the longest section that we journey with in terms of using the texts as prompts is the Magid section. And the Magid section is the fourth section. The Magid section has many, many highlights and many, many calls to action and many memorable experiences with which we use song and we use sight, and there's a lot to focus on Magid. We're not going to go through all of the experiences of Magid, but the opening statement of Magid, Halachmania, is an Aramaic declaration that this is the poor man, and we point. And any Haggadah that you use is going to give you prompts for each step. And there are points we need to make reference to, because there are times when we uncover the matzah, we elevate the matzah, we fill up our cups of wine, we point to certain things on the Seder plate, because the rabbis designed such a beautiful experience that encompasses all the senses. So make sure you prepare in advance and know, and maybe put stickies in your Haggadah so you know exactly when to do what, or task somebody with reminding you. It's usually what Rachel's doing. As I'm off on some sort of tangent, Rachel's there to make sure I'm staying on point. But we start with Halachmania, and then we go to the famous 4 questions and the Manishtana. And the Manishtana focuses on 4 different questions to try and understand why tonight is different from all other nights. And I think we can expand this thinking to think about what are some of the questions that we rarely get to ask ourselves, that we rarely get to think about. Why is this gathering different from past years? And why is this night an important experience for me? And what is it there to teach us? And there are 4 classic questions, each with answers, and each with hundreds and hundreds of explanations and insights that we can relate to in so many different ways. And then we go on to put the Seder plate back on the table, and go into the idea of Avadim. We were slaves, and then we start to go through the journey. And the journey takes us through understanding how we got to become slaves. Because we can't understand the Exodus if we don't know how we got into Egypt in the first place. And the text of the Haggadah is rather lengthy in taking us through all the different experiences that helps us understand exactly why we got into this experience first place. And it uses all the texts from Exodus, and it quotes all the different texts. It gives some color and some history. You can say all of these. If you're at our communal Seder, which we hope everyone can join us next year, we try and share all of these in English in an abbreviated way. They're lengthy, but you can go around the table and read them. People can read in English, people can read in Hebrew, and there are some elements towards the beginning third of the section that we reference the blood, fire, and pillar of smoke that God took us out from Egypt with. And then we have the plagues. There's a custom when we get up to the plagues to spill some wine from the cup onto the side of the plate of the cup. And as we go through each of the plagues, and then we go through the acronym, which a mnemonic, which was a way to remember the plagues. And then we get to the famous song of Dayenu. Again, we're not going to go through each of these and read them out and give explanations, but there are beautiful insights and understanding of why this Haggadah was formulated in the way that it is. And unlike the Torah, the Haggadah was formulated over years and generations and put together, and there's beautiful ideas to understand. The highlight of this first third of Magid is the Dayenu song. The Dayenu song is a highlight for many, a joy for many, and then this is the journey after Dayenu to get to the highlight of what the Talmud teaches us is the three most important things on the Passover Eve, on the Seder. Number one, Seder 1 and Seder 2 are ultimately the same experience, but you have the chance to reenact them and to re-experience them and make them different for yourself. By using a different Haggadah, by sharing different insights, by role-playing things differently, by giving people different ideas. Again, we still have many days and many hours before Pesach Seder. If you're going to be with other people, then task them with preparing one section. If it's your children, if it's your partner, if your spouse, then say, can you prepare this, an idea, a thought, a question, an explanation on Dayenu? And they can go and research that. And you can make the experience come to life.
And the whole point in the Magid section, and the word Magid in Hebrew actually means to tell. And as much as there are words written here, those words are to help create the narrative. The goal is to tell the story, to ask questions and keep telling the story over and over again. So the ways that we can personalize this, like the more we can personalize, the better it is. The more we talk, the better it is. So as much as we are using this Magid section as a guide, the goal is Magid. The goal is to talk, the goal is to share, and the goal is to storytell. So being a little bit off the page is good also, and to find really relevant ways to personalize the whole story.
And it's a journey of freedom. And it's a journey of self. And we said on Thursday night at the workshop that as much as there was a physical slavery, as much as our ancestors were enslaved in the harshest of conditions, there was also a spiritual slavery here as well. And there's also elements that chain us and constrict us in 2021, living in Manhattan or wherever we are. And there's a difference between vacation and freedom. And there's another word that the Torah uses to discuss liberty, and that word is dror. And we speak about it, and we think about it, and in the Kiddush we make reference to Zman Cheroteno and Cherot, and it's an essential idea for us to differentiate between liberty and freedom, because liberty is the removal of constraints that takes away personal choice and independent action, and it's granted by somebody else. But tonight, we're celebrating freedom. And freedom is the injection of positive purpose and value, and that a person earns for himself. That man can free himself from enslaving influences to achieve the better. And that's one of the goals of the Seder night as well. That on the first Seder night, thousands of years ago, the Jews in Egypt didn't have liberty yet. They were still slaves in Egypt. But they had spiritual freedom because they chose to believe in God's promise. And they chose to believe in the idea of going against the Egyptian rule and taking the Paschal sacrifice, the sacred lamb, which was so important for the Egyptians, and go ahead with the Korban Pesach. And they earned their freedom with these choices. And the freedom that we achieved empowers us to this very day to continue to serve God and to act morally, to uplift ourselves and to be empathetic and to do chesed. And it's an important distinction between the ideas of liberty and freedom. The third part of the Maggid section takes us to three themes that everybody has to say, everybody has to understand, everybody has to fulfill on Pesach night. And the three things are the Pesach, the Matzah, and the Maror. And we point to each of them, and then we spend a paragraph explaining what each of them are. And Pesach is the Paschal sacrifice, reminiscent of the bone-looking thing. I don't even know what animal this is from. I don't want to know what animal this is from, but I assume it's a chicken bone. And we look at it and we remember the Paschal sacrifice. And then we speak about the matzah, which we don't have here tonight, but matzah. And then we look at the maror, which is the bitter herbs. Remember that if you want to be very precise, there are many different guidelines to how much we should drink of the wine and how much of each of these required foods that we should taste and consume. And not only is there required amounts, there's also required time spans. So when eating the maror, you can use romaine lettuce, because traditionally romaine lettuce was very bitter. Nowadays, mostly romaine lettuce is not so bitter. So people take grated horseradish, and not horseradish you get in a jar with a kosher brand on it, because that's usually got a sweet tinge to it. But real horseradish root that you can grate yourself, or since we love to have other people do things for us and pay a premium, you can buy grated horseradish at any kosher supermarket in preparation for Pesach, and have that as your maror. The concluding section here takes us to the beginning of the next cup of wine. And we start saying the second cup of wine with the introduction of Hallel. What is Hallel?
So Hallel typically is a collection of different chapters in the book of Psalms, and it's usually said on occasion of being saved or a joyous occasion. And what's interesting is that there is a Hallel section. It's one of the steps of the Seder after Birkat HaMazon, after we finish the meal and after we finish blessing God and thanking God for everything we just ate. There's a section that's reserved for Hallel. But what's interesting is that right before we finish Maggid, right before we finish this section, just before we consume the second cup of wine, there are a few chapters of Hallel that actually appear here. And it's explained that when done correctly, the spontaneous burst of joy and gratitude and singing and excitement for what we just experienced over the past hour, 2 hours, however long it is, the only expression is that of Hallel. So it's almost like working backwards. If that is engineered into the design of Maggid at the end, working backwards, the whole point of it is to achieve a spontaneous expression of gratitude and joy and song and dance. Like we should feel at the end of Maggid that we're jumping out of our seats, just so excited and so swept away in the glory and the presence of God. So the reason it's there is to inform us how spontaneously expressive we're meant to be come the end of the section of Maggid.
And most people try not to eat in between the cups and ultimately eat until you get to the section of Shulchan Aruch, which is the beautiful holiday meal that you have. If you are hungry, then the blessing of Borei Pri Ha'adama was already recited on the karpas, so you can snack on some crudités and some vegetables. But the Hallel journey begins, the Hallel taken from Psalms, and there are many tunes that we sing in synagogue and sing at home. I can sing this together. Then the second cup of wine is drunk after the recitation of the pre-blessing, which talks about redemption. And then we're up to the next section, which is rachza, which is washing our hands. And if you think about the 15 steps, if we really want to be honest and acknowledge, there are 3 steps which don't seem so unique to Passover. They don't seem so unique at all, actually. And they're the ideas of washing our hands, of rachza before we eat bread, of eating matzah, of eating eating the matzah, and barech, and we perform those acts and those three symbols every Shabbat and every holiday meal. What's special about them on Seder night? And it's actually interesting to mark a distinction that on Shabbat and on the other festival evenings, we have an obligation to experience an oneg Shabbat, an enjoyment, a satisfaction, and eat meals, but there's no commandment to eat bread. And on Yom Tov, on festivals, there's a commandment to enjoy, but again, there's no specific commandment to eat bread. The only time throughout the year that we are actually obligated to eat bread or flour is at the Seder. And Rachza initiates that, launches us into the incredibly important mitzvah, a unique mitzvah of eating the matzah. We wash our hands here, everybody washes their hands, remains quiet, and then we make the blessing for the matzah. Unlike just eating challah or bread, there are two blessings here. First is hamotzi lechem min haaretz, the same refrain that we're familiar with when we eat any grain, any bread product, bagel or challah or bread. And then the second blessing, which is important, one keeps in mind that we're also going to eat later on, and specifically the korach sandwich, and keep that in mind for this blessing. It's the positive commandment to eat matzah, and that's why we make another blessing. We consume at least I can send this to anybody. This is a little chart which helps us understand how much to eat, but 2/3 of a machine-made matzah we should eat. It might get a little stuck in your mouth. Your mouth is a little dry. We chew it, we enjoy it, we eat it, and we lean once again to the left. After the matzah, the bread of affliction, the bread of freedom, we should make sure that we have an appetite at the Seder. So we keep that in mind as well. As we eat our matzah and celebrate a collective future, we think about also what things are we looking forward to this coming year. And certainly things that we all look forward to this coming year are very different from things that we might have experienced this past year. And then we have the maror. And the maror is another commandment, another step of the Seder. We do not recline when we eat the maror. We take a little bit of maror, we take a little bit of the charoset, and we eat them together. And we make a blessing once again of al achilat maror. And why are we taking the bitterness and why are we dipping it into the charoset? And it's true, we're in the midst of suffering, but in retrospect, sometimes we also need to ensure that throughout our suffering, and we said this earlier, we're also always filled with compassion for anybody around us. And suffering is bitter, but sometimes it's bitter medicine. And the Jewish people came out from Egypt and carried the lessons that they experienced in Egypt with them, and carried those experiences with them forward. It became part of who they are. And we think and we reflect again on what bitter experiences have we had this past year that we needed to face. All of us have had different experiences. How have they changed us? How have they made us better? And what lessons have we learned from those experiences? And what ways can we still taste a bitterness in our life? And what ways can we feel and experience a lightening of our load as we look to this experience and look forward as well? Any questions? Give a chance to everybody to unmute, to ask any questions.
Any questions? No.
Okay. We said earlier that the Seder experience has 4 parts to it, and now we're in the present tense, experiencing the bitterness, experiencing the matzah. This is all living in the present. And we go from the maror into the korach. And the korach is the sandwich, not a bread sandwich, but a matzah sandwich. And we take matzah, and we take charoset, and we take the maror, and we dip it together, and we eat this sandwich while we recline to the left. And that is reminiscent of Hillel sandwich, which puts these pieces together, and these two components of remembering the temple, And we know that we are a people of memory, and we are people of national memory. And we balance this freedom and this exile and this memory by having this sandwich together. And in many ways, this is also the sandwich of salvation. It's comprised of matzah and maror, and it's remembering, as I said, of that which Hillel did at the time of the temple. And there's a connection between Hillel's idea and what we're focusing on in our own struggles and our own reality as well. And during our own difficulties, where can we find sweet remedies? And where can we turn to find comfort? And one repair that we can find for ourselves is perhaps to adopting Hillel's example, that even when we disagree with somebody else, we still have a level of respect and differential manners and sensitivity to people at all times. And that's the idea of the Korach. At this point, we kind of reorient and reset the table because we want to take away the Haggarot and we get up to the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch loosely translates as the set table. And to fully appreciate the meal, there's a question there. Rachel can
hold up. Sorry. Many. So the question that was asked is about whether if it's a lot to consume 4 cups of grape juice or wine. So you do not need a massive cup. It can't be a tiny cup either, but it doesn't have to be, something this size. It can definitely be something smaller, and you're supposed to consume majority of that cup. But you can definitely use a smaller cup. It doesn't have to be a gigantic cup. But yes, the mandate is to consume all 4 cups, and part of that is that there, because of what it represents, and the mitzvah is there because of the representation of 4 different stages of redemption, understanding the slavery, understanding the theme of 4, and the recurrence of that theme that appears throughout the Seder. So the 4 cups are definitely required. They are required equally for men and women, and should be ideally consumed. So, but if it's a lot to drink and consume, definitely, anyone can feel free to use a smaller cup.
And thank you. And keep the questions coming. And when we think about preparing for the Seder, there's a beautiful table, which is how we want all of our Shabbat and Yom Tov meals to come and to be presented. But in particular, people pay special attention to the Passover table. And there's so many different prompts that you can put on your table to help lighten the experience and to make it more experiential and joyous. And we keep these from year to year. There are different plague masks that are good for both adults and kids to wear at certain times. We buy some rewards and games to hand out to kids. We do Seder dollars as well. So we print fake money. And whether you're an adult or a child, or whoever's at the Seder table, if you ask a question or you answer a question correctly, you get $1. Then you get to trade your dollar in after the holiday for something of real fiscal value, depending on how many Seder dollars you earn. Depends if it's a 1-to-1 exchange rate, and depending on how much we want to reward those. But there are so many games, and we have bingo games. And if you're looking for ideas, if you want PDFs, if you want to send something to where the host where you're going to go, or bring something, email us. We can share lots of digital folders with lots of different ideas. But we come up to Shulchan Aruch, and Shulchan Aruch is the festive meal. And some have the custom of eating an egg before they start the meal. It's not required, but the festive meal is meant to be a full, joyous, delicious meal. It does not have to have 3 courses of gefilte fish, chicken soup with matzo ball, and then loads of vegetables and 300 different types of meats and chicken. It can be 1 course. It can be as lavish, as large as you want, but it should be an entire meal that should be enjoyed and that should be appreciated. Many people ask about drinking extra cups of wine throughout the meal. Yeah, 4 cups you have to drink for the Seder. So if you can go through more cups of wine, but I think you should be cognizant of the 4 cups that one needs to drink. The meal doesn't have any special elements to it. You can drink water, seltzer, and enjoy the meal for as long or short as you want. but there's a conscious thought that you might want to have as you have this shulchan aruch, as you have this set table, which is the awareness that you bring into your own eating throughout the year. And if your table is not always set, literally and figuratively, what are you doing about that, and how are you changing that? And how can I reset my table? And how can I see who's missing around my table? And who are the people that I want to mend the relationships with, so that next time I have a complete table, obviously putting this pandemic aside, but next time I have such a beautiful evening in my life that I'm preparing for, who else do I want to invite physically into that experience to have? The meal should include dessert, because the remainder of the 15 steps of the Seder, beginning with Safon in just a moment, is actually one which involves more eating, and then ultimately has the grace after meal, the Birkat Hamazon. So after the meal is eaten, we bring back the afikoman, which has been taken off the table, and classically it's been hidden by the children or the youngest person at the Seder. And we come back and we try and split the afikoman up between all of us who are at the table. And it's the second piece of the matzah that we put away from earlier, and it represents the idea of redemption. But we need to search for it, because it's been hidden by whoever wants to hide the afikoman. And in many households, hiding of the afikoman becomes an exchange and a barter for a gift and for a present. And I'll give you back the afikoman if you get me a new pair of Ugg boots, or a new iPhone, or whatever it is that you're wanting to desire. And the idea of the afikoman representing the redemption, and that we need to search for, we need to put effort into it, is ultimately reminiscent of the idea that we need to work on changing the future for ourselves. And how do I have a strategy to know where I want to get and where I want to go, and what the next step in the journey is for me, and how am I going to get there? And once the afikomans come back to the table, we each eat a little piece of the afikoman. Even if you're full and you're bursting, make sure you keep some room for the afikoman. And it's really preferable not to eat or drink except for the required cups of wine after the afikoman. And then we have the barech, then we have the grace after meals, which is the present. And eating means we always conclude with Birkat Hamazon, filled with an appreciation for our present, for our sustenance, and our future dreams. And we look at the grace after meals the same way that we look at the grace after meals after any meal that we have. It's the same language, the special insertions for the holiday. And then we conclude with the third cup of wine. And the grace after meals, the barech, takes us straight into the journey for the third cup of wine, which is consumed once again by leaning to the left. And then we have the special moment for Elijah's cup. We pour the fourth cup of wine, and the door is opened. And do you want to share your family with her?
Sure. So we have
at the piece of Shloch Hamadcham.
Right. So right after, or right before, we invite Elijah into our homes, our individual homes, and he makes a lot of visits that night. So, and he has to drink from everybody's cup also. But what we did growing up is that I am the grandchild of 4 Holocaust survivors. And for my grandparents and for us sitting around our Seder table, thank God, with my grandparents with us, this was always a moment for them to reflect on the slavery that they went through during the time of the Holocaust. And we have a special reading that we do together as a family, where we read about the Warsaw Ghetto, and the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto happened on Passover Eve. And we read about what they went through, and very stirring and magnificent language. And we end off that reading with collectively singing Ani Ma'amin, the song of belief and of faith. And that no matter what's happened throughout Jewish history, there's this tethering of belief that we just never let go. And we're constantly part of that same narrative. So just as our great-great-grandparents all the way back came out of Egypt, in a very personal way, I had grandparents that also were redeemed from slavery. So it was a beautiful ritual that was introduced in my home growing up, and something that we continue to do in our home.
And thank you. And at the end of this section, after Magid and after the Korech and after the Barech, we have the idea of Hallel. And this is the journey towards the end of the Seder experience. And we already started the Hallel beforehand, and now we conclude with the remainder of Hallel. And Hallel is a beautiful journey of recognition of all of the gratitude and all of the wonderful miracles that God has done for the Jewish people. And certainly tonight, focusing on the idea of the redemption. Hallel also includes some of the prayers which we say on Shabbat and on the weekday. It takes us through the Yishtabach, and then it takes us the beautiful Nishmat Kol Chai, the beautiful poem that we speak about the dependence of the soul on God, and a beautiful text which we recite only on Shabbat and the festivals, and takes us all the way through to the very end of the Hallel is the fourth cup of wine. Once we conclude the fourth cup of wine, many Haggadahs print the special blessing that is recited after drinking wine, because we already did the grace after meals. The grace after meals includes all the food which we ate. Food has a pre-blessing and a post-blessing. So we have to recite, the special blessing for drinking wine. So we have the post-blessing. And then we have the last section, which is the section of Nirtza. The thank yous is the Hallel. And we focus on the slavery at the beginning, and we focus on the positive and the thank you at the end, and the recognition that God has brought us to this moment. Thanking our friends and thanking our family for various experiences that happened to us and for us over our lifespan is for most of us very intuitive. How we should thank them might differ family and person to person, but thankfulness is tied to humility. And sometimes we don't think about that in our relationship with God, that we recognize thanks for individuals a lot easier than we recognize thanks for God. And here, on the moment of the climax of the Seder experience, as the fourth cup of wine is about to be consumed, we've just recited all these beautiful psalms and blessings of praise and thanks, and we just turn and we were so grateful for the experience that our ancestors had and that we have of being redeemed and being set free. And I mentioned at the beginning that there are 4 different time elements of the Passover Seder experience. There's the setup, leading us in. There's the past, which is the Magid. There's the future, which is the Hallel and the Nirtza, and there's all the present periods. And Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, one of the preeminent rabbis of our generation, speaks about three different dimensions of time awareness of a Jew. And he speaks about, we live in this notion of retrospection, that to re-experience the past is such an important fundamental part of being Jewish, knowing where we came from, knowing the lessons of our past generations, and appreciation of the value of the now, of the present, constant chances that we each have for greatness and for care and for love and for doing good. And there's the idea of anticipation, of aspiring and yearning for the promises of the future. And we're moving towards something, and not only an outgrowth of the past, but going towards a journey of an experience individually and together. And the Seder, the 15 steps, incorporates all of these 3 periods. And the structure of the Haggadah takes us through the setup, the past, the present, and the future. And the Nirtza, the last step, the 15th step, is an acknowledgement of the future. And we say this has all been completed in accordance with the law. And it's all happened as it was meant to happen. And now we have the ability to sing and hope for next year in Jerusalem. And we look to a future time. And we will see the end of challenge and the end of pain. And we'll cross that Red Sea for ourselves individually, and we'll look towards a future experience. The second night of Passover, many have the custom at some point throughout the Seder of counting the Omer. And we're going to devote some time after Pesach to study this on Thursday night, a meaningful Jewish living, but it's an important idea to not forget to count the Omer on the second night of Passover. At the end of the Seder, there are lots of different songs which people sing and have become part of the Seder experience. They're not formally part of the 15 steps of the Seder, but they're fun parts of the evening, which, because we are a people of tradition, have become formal parts of the experience. And there's no minimum, maximum song. There's the 13 attributes, there's the Chad Gadya. The songs, like all of our texts within Judaism, have beautiful meaning and significance and history. And there's beautiful tunes and family customs that everybody sings for these songs. But they're a wonderful way to end off the evening and to end with some laughs and some fun and some engagement. Are there any questions?
Yes. So you said there are 15 parts to the Seder, but we just went through 14. So what is considered the 15th?
Yeah. So motzi matzah is sometimes considered 1 and sometimes considered 2.
Let's review them.
So it's kadesh, which is kiddush, orchatz, where we wash our hands, karpas, where we dip, yachatz, take the middle matzah, the 3 and divide, magid, which is the whole section of telling the story, rachza, washing hands, motzi, making the blessing, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, making the blessing, matzah, which is number 8, which is eating the matzah, maror, korech, which is the sandwich, we got 10, shulchan orech, 11, which is the meal, safon, eating of afikomen and reclining, barech is the grace after meals, hallel, praise, and nirtza, the conclusion. So the 15, very often, especially if you're singing like a song in your head, motzi matzah usually sounds like it's 1 step. It's actually technically 2. There's the blessing of about just about to eat a wheat product. And then there's, of course, the separate mitzvah mandate to consume matzah. So those are considered 2 separate ones. Great question.
Somebody asked in the chat, I see, about the flowers. Flowers are not required for your Passover Seder experience, but we like to beautify our tables on Shabbat and the festival, and certainly on Pesach. So flowers is one way to do that. You can choose any wine of your choice. Please, of course, remember to make sure that your wine is kosher for Passover. Most kosher wines are typically always kosher for Passover, but just pay attention to the label. Someone also asked, what is the optimal gift to bring if you're going to someone's home? There are no optimal gifts. Many hosts will graciously decline anything, but it's always nice to bring a bottle of wine, which can be consumed as part of the part of the 4 cups, or some kosher Passover desserts. But there's no need to bring anything. I do tell people all the time, when you're going to someone else's home, bring your own Haggadah, because they'll usually have a Haggadah for everybody, and it's nice to have your own. However, it's nice to have your own because maybe you have notes and you've written and you've prepared from it. It's also important to follow along with the Haggadah of where you're at, because it's different page numbers. And it's very difficult, as you know, some of you from our Shabbat services, when you have multiple different Sidurim, to constantly give different page numbers. And while there are 15 steps, if you have a different Haggadah, it's going to have different insights and explanations, maybe charts, maybe photos, and therefore the page numbers are all over the place. So make sure you have a Haggadah that you're familiar with, but also one that your host is able to help along with the experience as well. Any other questions?
Yes, I have one. I'm just wondering about the Haggadah, and if you need to buy one every year, is that preferable, or is it just because, someone offered me one the other day to purchase one. He said, buy it once, buy it right. But I've also heard the differing opinion to get one every year. So
it's a great question. There's no need to buy a Haggadah every year. The text of the Haggadah remains the same. The 15 steps remain the same. The translation remains the same. But every year, there are more beautiful insights that come out from contemporary rabbis, from Haggadah that are discovered from rabbis that are no longer with us. And it's a very regularly published book, because it has new meaning to the text of the Haggadah. So a lot of people have the ritual and the custom of buying a new Haggadah every year as a tool to prepare themselves for Pesach that year. And the Shulchan Aruch, the Kol Jewish law speaks about preparing for Pesach 30 days before Pesach. Shloshim Yom Koren Lifnei Chag. And people like to do that by looking at different explanations. And then every year, every Jewish publisher puts out more Haggadahs. So it's new insights. You do not need to have a new Haggadah. You can keep your Haggadah from year to year. You do have to be careful, though, if your Haggadah you're using from year to year, that you either put it away or you clean it to make sure there's no crumbs inside, because matzah from last year will become prohibited on Pesach this year. And don't forget that we need to also sell our chametz before Passover. The prohibition includes owning chametz. So go onto ckj.org and sell your chametz, and also nullifying your chametz before Passover and removing the chametz from your homes. All things which we can help you do with the packets of information about preparing your homes for Passover as well. And I want to just close with two ideas. Any other questions? Anybody?
I have a question about the extra cup. We don't pour wine in the extra cup. It just remains empty on the table.
Are you talking about for the cup for Elijah, the fifth cup?
The fifth cup, yes.
You actually pour wine in it, or grape juice, but yes, but it gets a beverage.
Elijah has no preference, wine or grape juice.
Right,
It begins the meal empty, and after the second cup of wine, prompted in your various Haggadahs, it'll say, now fill up, as you fill up the third cup, fill up the cup for Elijah as well. Great question. Any other questions? So I want to remind everybody of how amazing and what a blessing it is to be living in New York City and living in America and observing Pesach, because we shouldn't take it for granted for just one moment that we can go into any supermarket in this city and across the New York state and ultimately across the country and find kosher for Passover food. Now, it might not be the finest, it might not be the tastiest, it might not be the cheapest, but all of the major supermarket chains carry a section on Passover because it's part of their holiday selections, and they make it easy for us to get some matzah and to get some macaroons and to get some grape juice and to get some this and some that. And it's a beautiful, beautiful ability for us to say, you know what, it's something I can really jump in and really do for myself. I want to conclude with a story that I conclude with every year at the end of the Model Seder. And I hope that, please God, next year we do this, we can all be back in person and taste some of the delicious macaroons that we're going to enjoy tonight, and that we can't virtually share throughout the screen. But it's a story from a rabbi who's a teacher at Yeshiva University. He lives on the Upper West Side. His name is Rabbi Benjamin Block. He's very well published. He's written many books, and he's one of my teachers from Yeshiva University. And he shares the following story: that he was browsing on the Lower East Side in a Judaica store, and he spotted in the window of a store an all too familiar object, and he immediately recognized what this object was. And he looked at it and he saw the family's name etched into the border, and it was a beautiful Seder plate. And it was a Seder plate that he so distinctly remembered because this Seder plate was the focus of this person's life. And the eulogy that he delivered for the owner of the Seder plate remains so clear in his mind and in his memory. And its owner was a survivor of Auschwitz. Its owner was a survivor of the Holocaust. And what a tale this plate had been on. And he tells the story that when the Germans had rounded up all the Jews in this little town for deportation, the Jews living on the fringes of the city heard what was happening, and the Germans were coming town to town, and Shmuel decided that he had a chance. He had a chance to take some of the religious artifacts of his family and perhaps hold them for a future time, should that time come. So he went into his backyard and he took the Seder plate and the Kiddush cup and his father's Chanukiah, his candelabra, his menorah, and he buried them. And where did he bury them? He paced 26 steps from the tree, massive tree in his backyard, and there he buried them in 26, representing the numerical value of one of God's names. And he buried this treasure together, a Seder plate, a Kiddush cup, and a Chanukiah. He wished that he had a chance to hide much more. His dad, his parents had a beautiful set of Talmud and Bible, but it wasn't possible. Time and ability. And he made a vow to himself that if God saved his life in Auschwitz, that he would make a vow to come back and use those religious artifacts for his family's ceremonies for many years to come. And he had no idea how he survived. By a miraculous turn of events, he survived Auschwitz, survived the Holocaust, and he made his way back to Europe many years after emigrating to America. He made his way back to his town. He found that house. He went back to that garden. He walked 26 steps and he dug. And there he found a Seder plate and the Kiddush cup and the candelabra. And he used them every single year at his Seder plate with his children and his grandchildren. And he would share the beauty of what they represented for him, what they represented for our tradition. And Rabbi Block, as he saw the Seder plate in the window, was ultimately overtaken with disbelief. How did it get into the window of this Judaica store selling it? And he went to the store and he asked the owner, he said, how did it get here? And the owner said, let me tell you. He said, it's from an estate sale. He said, an estate sale? He said, yes. He said, his old man died and his children have been fighting over his heirlooms and his estate, and they wanted nothing to do with his Judaica collection. They're not religious, they're not traditional, they're not connected, and all they care about is the money. And I bought this at an estate sale, and I'm selling it. And Rabbi Block immediately took the Seder plate and said, how much are you selling it for? I said, I want to buy it. And started crying and was overtaken by emotion and said how precious this Seder plate is for me. And then he went home and he was struck with tremendous sadness because the symbol that sanctifies memory was discarded by those who forget their past. And if anyone has ever experienced anyone suffering from Alzheimer's, you know how horrible it can be to live without an awareness of the events of where you came from. And Rabbi Block was taken, and he spoke about this to us many times, that the messages of the past were discarded by the next generation. Why we're forgotten, we're not valued. We have an experience in a few evenings, the Pesach Seder, to remember the past so that we can ensure our future is shaped differently. And let's make sure that the Seder plates that are important to us are going to be important to our children and their children and their children as well. And make sure that the Seder plates that we have are never going to be throwaways and never going to be something which we discard of, and that we keep the beautiful traditions that we have. Because unless we remember, we're never going to be able to understand and live in the future. And that's why this story, and that's why the Seder experience is so important, because it encapsulates the message of the holiday, that God commands us to remember, because if we remember the past, we can understand the present, and together we can hope for a brighter future. So please continue to ask questions via email, via WhatsApp, call. I'm happy to help continue to prepare and help everyone experience the Seder and have a meaningful holiday. We have services this Saturday, and then we'll take a break next Saturday and join with the main service on Shabbat. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful evening and a happy and joyous and memorable Pesach experience.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.